Hello, welcome to Anatomy Physiology Lesson 3.01 on connective tissue. And in this lesson, we're going to be doing Introduction to Connective Tissue. So let me go to screen share. We're starting off with the summary page on connective tissue, excuse me. And we're going to wing through the first couple of bullet points pretty quickly. Give you guys a chance to write this down. So we have our function and our location. So our functions are bind together, protect, transport, and location everywhere. We have connective tissue all over our bodies. It's definitely the most probably common by volume, maybe not necessarily by mass, but it's definitely the most diverse group. So what we have here is adipose, what we have down here is blood, and what we have here is what's called a reeler. This is like the packing peanuts of the body. It's cushy, it's also strong. So we know adipose is our fat stores, but a reeler also does a little bit more support. So it's cushy like adipose, but it supports. There aren't a lot of commonalities between connective tissue groups, but what is the same? Every connective tissue has three parts. It has, number one, a special cell. And I'm just going to let you guys write this down and then we'll talk about them. Number one, a special cell. Number two, an intracellular fluid called the ground substance. And number three, fibers, which are called the matrix. So again, every connective tissue has a special cell, an intracellular fluid called the ground substance, and fibers, they're called the matrix. Each of the tissues have these in different amounts. So if we look at this top tissue, this is called a reeler tissue, lots of fibers. And in between the fibers is a fluid. It's kind of jelly-like. That's the ground substance. And then you see these black dots. Those are cells. They're called fibroblasts. That's the special cell. They build the fibers. This is probably the most balanced connective tissue that we have, in that it has an equal amount of special cells, an equal amount of fibers, and an equal amount of fluid. Versus if you come down here to blood, blood has got a lot of fluid. It's called plasma. It's got a lot of special cells, all these little red dots, and maybe you guys know these are called red blood cells or erythrocytes. Well, it doesn't have any fibers. It has bits of fibers. It's got little broken fiber bits. That's what clots when you bleed. So if we were talking about this, if we have the three, so if we've got boom, 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 the areolar has equal amounts of fiber, fluid, and cells. If we go to blood, blood has a lot of the fibers, or a lot of the fluid and the special cells, but not many fibers. If you look down here in the middle, this is adipose. So adipose has got a lot of the special cells, but it doesn't have many fibers and it doesn't have many fluid. See, look in between the cells. You can't see much fluid, can you? So we go way up on the cells, way down on the fluid and the fibers. But they all have these three to some degree. And I'm not going to ask you what's the profile for blood. Does it have more special cells, more fibers? But you need to know what a ground substance is. That's the fluid. And you need to know that matrix are the fibers. So think about bone. Bone actually is a connective tissue. What do you think that's going to be the highest in? Well, it turns out it's highest in fibers, but the fibers aren't flexible. They're rigid. So we have a lot of special cells in bone and we have a lot of fibers, but we don't have very much fluid. So that's kind of how the cell fluid fiber profile works for connective tissues. All right, the next page we're going to do is the summary sheet. So we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we're going to ignore this guy, 8, 9, we're going to ignore this guy. So we're going to talk about 9 connective tissues in this chapter. To start off with, let's look at how they're divided. So they all start in the embryo from a common source, which we're not going to talk about. So we talk about fluid tissue, fluid connective tissue, and that one's easy, that's blood. It's the only one that's a fluid. Then we go to supporting connective tissue. In other words, it helps create the structure for our body, and that's going to be bone and that's going to be cartilage. I know down here they have compact and spongy bone, and we'll talk about that later in the year. For right now, all you need to know is bone is one of our connective tissues. Cartilage, and notice here too, for bone, it says solid matrix. That means the fibers are solid. That's all that means. When we get to cartilage, you guys all know what cartilage is. If you've eaten a piece of steak and you've bitten down, you've gotten something that's kind of gristly, it's probably a piece of cartilage. Cartilage does a lot for us. We have structures in our body that are cartilage. So the discs between our vertebrae are cartilage. In our chest, we have cartilage that attaches our ribs to our sternum. We have cartilage that holds the two halves of the pelvis together. Our ears are cartilage, our nose is cartilage. So a lot of cartilage in our body. It falls into three categories. Hyaline is pronounced hyaline, and this is the most common. We have this, it's kind of like 80% of the cartilage is hyaline cartilage. Fibrocartilage is hard. This makes up our vertebral discs, and we'll write this down later, don't worry about it. And then elastic is our ears. We don't have a lot of elastic, but that's a good example, are the ears. Well, then what's this connective tissue proper? We divide that into two categories, loose and dense. So the loose has fewer fibers and more liquid. The dense has more fibers and less liquid, less ground substance. The loose, the areolar is the slide we looked at on the last sheet, where we had the big long strings and the dots, and we had a lot of substance in between. And the adipose we looked at. And think about if you have if you've ever cooked a roast and you pulled the fat off, that it's soft. And if you look at actual adipose, that like if you see post liposuction, of course it's greasy because it's basically storage for fat, but it's also soft. So these are very soft. There's a lot of fluid, and they help cushion us. So if you fall and you don't have a butt, you got a bony butt, it hurts, because if you've got some padding back there, it helps soften your fall a little bit. The dense connective fibers, the only two we're going to talk about are regular and irregular. Regular are tendons and ligaments, so those are pretty tough. And if you've ever cut up a chicken and you try to get the meat off the bone, there is a tendon that attaches that muscle to bone. And it's really tough, it's hard to cut. Then there's irregular, and that's not quite as tough, but it makes up a really large portion of our body. It makes up our dermis. So our epidermis is epithelial, but underneath that, the dermis is what we call dense, irregular connective tissue. I'm not going to hold you to, again, the profiles. Is it matrix? But I want you to understand what those terms are. But I do want you to understand that we've got categories here. We've got the tissue that holds us together. We've got fluid. We've got proper. On the next page, I wrote down some of those examples because I don't have any way to note this page. So I'm going to go ahead and flip forward. I would like you to know that dense, regular connective tissue is tendons and ligaments. So, and you can write this down on the summary sheet. I just want you to write down a couple of examples. Give you some time to write. Maybe you guys noticed I actually moved. I was recording these when I was on off from my surgery, and I had to just get some change of scenery. So I've got my peacock picture behind me. I really like my peacock. All right, dense irregular connective tissue is your dermis. It's your dermis. Hyaline cartilage is your nose and the cartilage that attaches your ribs. Now, I want to be careful. I wrote ribs. Your ribs are bone, but it's the cartilage that attaches your ribs to your sternum. So I should have been more specific there. I do apologize. it's called your costal cartilage. And then finally, I would like you to know that your fibrocartilage, the discs between your vertebrae, are fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the second hardest substance in your body after bone. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to wing back to the last page. So we have here dense regular connective, you should have tendons, ligaments. Dense irregular connective, you should have the dermis. Fibrocartilage, you should have the vertebral discs, hyaline cartilage, your nose, and the cartilage that attaches your ribs to your sternum. So what I'm going to be testing you on is general characteristics. You know, which one's going to be more of it's going to be harder cartilage or adipose. So obviously that's going to be cartilage. What category does it belong to? And so we're going to add that into, for 2020, the chapter on epithelial tissue and muscle and nervous, because we're not going to have time to do a whole chapter on connective. And we're not going to go over slides. We're not going to learn how to identify. Usually what we'll do is we'll do slides for all of these. We'll learn how to identify all of these, and that takes some time, and we're going to pass that by this year. All right, that's our summary on connective tissue. I'm going to stop sharing here. Thanks for watching and have a good day.